CEO of the California Milk Advisory Board. This panel discussion will explore some of the work and collaboration that is going on across the dairy supply chain to build and share the robust dairy sustainability story. To start, I'll provide a brief backdrop to our conversation and then introduce our panelists and go from there with questions. Starting on the consumer side, and despite all the disruption of COVID over the last couple of years, consumer engagement in the sustainability narrative continues to rise. Over the last 5 years, there was a 71% increase in Google searches related to sustainability, and that was up 30% last year alone. Furthermore, 85% of consumers have shifted their purchase behavior towards more sustainable products. And on the corporate side, the commitment is definitely growing. Companies have really stepped up and are taking charge of their own destiny. 65% of the global GDP are now under 2050 net zero commitments of some sort or another. And 96% of the world's 250 largest companies report on their sustainability performance and on an annual basis at least. The sense of urgency is heightened in just the last couple of years, and we're seeing a surge in support for sustainability efforts. On the consumer side, we've gone from passing interest to real action. What used to be an exception is now the expectation. A simple buzzword has turned into a cultural imperative. And on the customer side, when we sit down and talk about products, it used to be that sustainability was that nice to do tiebreaker. It's now table stakes for just about anything of consideration. As an industry, we've moved from endorsement to stewardship. A simple purpose statement is now proof of performance. When we talk about proof of performance, Michael shared this slide earlier, we are making significant progress. But we still have a long way to go. Getting dairy products from farm to consumer includes a complex supply chain. And even though farm operations account for about 70% of the total carbon footprint, there has to be a collaborative effort among all constituencies. We're very fortunate to have some great partners in this effort. Today, we're going to hear from Nestle and Starbucks, who've both been working directly with California dairy farmers to support on-farm sustainability efforts. We'll also hear from the CEO of California Dairies, the largest dairy cooperative in the state, who's been partnering with both Nestle and Starbucks on sustainability goals. We're looking forward to learning more about each of these companies' vision for the future and their ongoing collaborations that are working to ensure environmental, economic, and social sustainability. Okay, let's meet the panelists. All right, first, Kelly Bankston, Senior Vice President and Chief Procurement Officer at Starbucks. She's responsible for enhancing Starbucks' enterprise-wide functional, strategic planning, and sourcing, creating consistent global sourcing processes, developing a planning and sourcing talent management program, and building a values-based approach to working with suppliers. A respected leader inside and outside Starbucks, Kelly has held numerous leadership positions during her 10-plus years with Starbucks, including direct and indirect sourcing, store development, commercialization, and supply chain strategy. Good morning, Kelly. Raise your hand so we know which one is, there we go, excellent. All right, Kimberly Fisk is the Global Head of Procurement for Commodities for Nestle. where she is responsible for a global team managing commodity procurement activities. Her previous experience started in the New Zealand dairy industry before moving to the UK and working in supply chain and procurement roles in several fast-moving consumer goods companies. She joined Nestle in 2009, where she is focused on global sourcing strategies and risk management across commodities based in the UK, Singapore, and Switzerland. Welcome, Kimberly. And finally, Brad Anderson serves as the President and Chief Executive Officer of California Dairies, Inc., the world's largest manufacturer of non-fat milk powder, the largest producer of butter in the United States, and an exporter of finished dairy products to over 50 countries. Through this role, he brings over 29 years of leadership and consumer goods experience, spanning several leading consumer products companies and a passion for dairy nutrition. Since taking the CDI helm in January of 2020, Brad has led the cooperative into growth mode, driven by investments in people, technology, and innovation. Again, welcome to all. All right. Well, let's jump in here. And I'm going to get the questions kicked off. Here, first with Kelly. Starbucks has been recognized for leadership in shaping a resource-positive future and nourishing a sustainable and collaborative approach with your suppliers. Please tell us about your sustainability goals as a company, why they're important to you, and what your general progress is to date.
Thank you so much, John, and thanks for having me. I'm thrilled to be here. So since the beginning, Starbucks has been a different kind of company, one with deep purpose, where we work together to create a positive impact on the world. It is our role and responsibility to pursue ambitious goals for our partners and for our communities and our planet. We have set ambitious 2030 targets to reduce our carbon, water, and waste footprints by half. We've done this in part because of farmers around the world, from dairy farmers here in the US, and quite honestly everywhere, to coffee farmers in Brazil. They all rely on a healthy planet to produce high-quality products. We set our 2030 goals based on an assessment of our environmental impact across our global operations and supply chain, which provides a clear starting point for where we want to go and where we want to be. It quickly became clear that in order to reach our resource-positive goals and protect our planet, we must innovate and collaborate to source coffee and dairy responsibly and sustainably, but we can't do it alone. Leadership and sustainability takes commitment, investment, innovation, time, and most importantly, partnership. Right now, from the impact of the climate crisis, rising costs, we know it's never been harder to be a farmer. And as a company that works with the farming community every day, it is our responsibility to help drive solutions that support both people and planet. Since Starbucks introduced its first handcrafted beverage, the cafe latte, in 1984, milk has been a really important ingredient for the company and is part of more than 60% of Starbucks core beverage offerings. I think that's always surprising to people, 60%. It's a big number. At the same time, dairy and coffee are the two largest contributors to our carbon footprint, accounting for more than a third of our total carbon emissions. Starbucks is activating these goals through partnerships within our supply chain, as well as industry collaborative efforts such as the Net Zero Initiative. We would like to thank CDI for their valued partnership in this work. Since December, our team has been visiting dairy farms in California. These farms have provided us with rich and dynamic conversations and an opportunity to learn firsthand from farmers. It's important to us to learn from the farmers so that we're working together. It's also an important step forward to collect critical data that will advise how we continue to shape this work and add value for all involved while supporting our future in sustainable dairy. Thank you.
I have to tell you, it does my heart good to see those gallon jugs of milk behind the counter at Starbucks all the time. You're a great customer for sure. All right, Kimberly, let's move on to you. Nestle has set major sustainability goals for your entire supply chain. Please tell us about those goals, why they're important to you, and what your progress is looking like.
Okay, well, thanks a lot, John, and thanks everyone. I really appreciate the invitation to be able to talk about the great work that we've been doing so far, along with our partners in the industry. In 2019, Nestle committed to net zero emissions, and basically by 2015. And as the sort of largest food and beverage company in the world, this is quite a commitment to have made. By December 2020, we'd published a very detailed roadmap to net zero, which kind of maps our way to reduce our emissions over the next 30 years. Basically, by 2025, we're going to cut 20% of emissions, and by 2030, we plan to cut 50% of emissions. This is kind of a whole company-wide movement that we're reinstating across the organization. So it impacts our brands, our businesses, our employees, but also very indirectly and directly in many cases, our suppliers and our farmers as well. So I think very similar to what Kelly mentioned, our largest contributor to our greenhouse gas emissions is sourcing our ingredients. It actually represents 71% of all of our greenhouse gas emissions across the organization. And half of this comes from dairy and livestock. So it's a really big chunk of what we do. And so we know that we need to get it right, otherwise we're not going to be able to meet our commitments. And this is why it's also so important for us to work very closely with our farmers and with our suppliers to make sure that we can meet these commitments. A lot's been done over the last couple of years. I think it's a very exciting journey to be part of. I think every single week we see new initiatives coming in and new projects to reduce, to remove, and also to compensate our carbon emissions. I think one of the main commitments that we've made along the net zero roadmap is also the introduction of regenerative agricultural practices for our key ingredients. I think regen ag plays a really critical role in improving soil health, restoring our water cycles, and also increasing biodiversity in the long term. We believe that this is one of the best ways for us to have an immediate and also a long-term impact by prioritizing farming, particularly from a regenerative agricultural efforts perspective. This is why Nestle is investing 1.2 billion in regen ag, working directly with farmers until 2025. And this is part of a larger commitment that we've made, around 3.2 billion to tackle climate action overall. So we're really looking forward to continuing to work with our suppliers and with our farmers on this commitment.
That's great. Thank you, Kimberly. And, I think I heard at one point, Nestle is the largest purchaser of milk in the world. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah, we are the biggest dairy buyers globally.
Excellent.
So we're sourcing from all regions across the world, so including many that you probably don't think about on a daily basis, but we work very closely with farmers in places like India, Pakistan, Indonesia, on top of obviously the obvious ones like the US, Europe, and Oceania.
Excellent. All right, Brad. California Dairy supplies dairy products to major global food companies. We've just heard from two of them. How do CDI sustainability goals align with those of Nestle and Starbucks? And again, why is this work so important to CDI?
Great, thanks, John, and thank you for having me on the panel. It's an honor to be on the panel with my friends at Starbucks and Nestle, and to represent our member owners from California Dairy. So, as we dig in, the answer to your first question is really easy. We're necessarily dependent. I think as you're going to hear as we go through our talk today, all of this is best accomplished in the most efficient way as we work together, the entire supply chain. So that's the producers, the processors, and the brands, and then with a nice healthy a dose of collaboration with our government partners, both at the state and federal level. So we have to do this together. That's really the only way we can do it effectively, with the amount of speed and urgency that we all are committed to. So let's talk a little bit about the journey that CDI is on and what have we done so far. We've actually just completed our baseline work that we've done with a collaboration of both internal resources and then to get a non-biased view of a third party to make sure that we have robust numbers that both compare to 2013, which was kind of the baseline set in California, 2018, which is more of a national baseline, and then where are we today? And so we're going to be sharing those results over the coming months, and we're really excited because I think it's going to show the tremendous progress that we made here at California Dairies. You know, a lot of what we talk about is, you know, why is this important? And I think we've gotten past that. I think the introduction that Michael gave to this summit was really inspiring. Talked about a lot of the progress that some of us who work in this every day probably don't realize, but when you hear it in that kind of concise context, we should be really proud about the progress we've made and encouraged about additional progress that we must make as we go forward. So CDI is very committed to this on all fronts, and that's we were one of the founding members of the initial commitment to net zero as part of the International Innovation Center for U.S. Dairy. We're committed towards reaching a goal of greenhouse gas neutrality industry-wide. That's really important to be part of the contributors to that as the second largest co-op in the U.S. and the largest in California, the largest dairy state. Those investments have been vast in California. You might recall some of the statistics that Michael shared in that opening, and California is leading the U.S. I would also say I think California is leading the world, and as we start to quantify the progress around GHGs and overall sustainability, that's going to bear out. And so when you think about what we've done specifically within California Dairies, we have over 25% of our farms in some phase of digester operation, either fully operational or in some part of planning or construction. Over a third of our dairies are powered by solar. These are meaningful steps forward, and again, I think set a bar, not just within the US, but in the world. And we're very anxious, again, to see those numbers quantified on a common platform, measured in a common way, so that we can really see who's making the progress and encourage all stakeholders to move faster and more aggressively. A lot of that is a requirement for us to do business with key partners like Nestle and Starbucks. And we take that very seriously. So that collaboration is important. They are actively investing in the space with people like California Dairies and others. And that should be recognized as a blueprint on how we can move forward really effectively. The last acknowledgement I think is really important, specifically about California, is a lot of this would not have been possible without the support of Secretary Ross here in California. And you saw the numbers on funding, particularly around some of the digester projects. That's a key component to making that economically viable for our farmers. So that support has been much appreciated, and we need it to continue for us to make the kind of progress with the speed that we want. So a lot of progress. We're very encouraged at getting to a space to be able to share the arithmetic behind all that. And you know, again, a lot more work to do, but progress certainly has been made. So look forward to continuing to share some of that as we go through the dialogue today.
Well, thanks, Brad. You know, you all have outlined some big initiatives, some major commitments, and certainly some ambitious goals. I'd like to ask each of you to talk maybe a little bit about what you see as some of the larger challenges in bringing these goals to life. Anybody want to start? Why don't you start? Sticking up.
All right, I'm happy to start. I think one of the largest challenges that is going to be bringing these to life is just getting everybody on the same page and working towards the same goals. So if you think about the supply chain and its totality of dairy, there are so many parts and pieces that touch everything. And then at the core of the greenhouse gas emission actually is the cow. So how do we protect her, work together as stakeholders, and then get to a viable solution that does reduce greenhouse gas emissions, that reduces water consumption? You start adding in plastics and fuel and just the ecosystem, it gets out of control pretty quickly. So that's where it's exciting to be able to have conversations like this and have key leaders from different parts of the supply chain come together and work through how do we have a sustainable future for dairy together versus individually or just attacking one portion of the problem at a time.
That's great.
Yeah, so maybe if I just build on that piece a little bit more, I think one of the challenges that we're really facing across the industry and across all industries is this real lack of international standards. So I think it's definitely coming, but it's not coming quickly enough, because I think this would be my other big piece or big challenge that I'd like to highlight is in some cases there is definitely a lack of urgency. But I guess from a Nestle perspective, we see climate change as one of the greatest risks to our business, and I hope that we all see it in a very similar light. We really need to act now, and we really need these international standards to make sure that we're all operating off the same hymn sheet.
Excellent, Brad.
Sure. There's no denying, farming in California is not always the easiest, right? We have significantly higher input costs across the board, from energy to wages to taxes to lots of things that make it a challenge to farm and farm profitably in California. So what's really important to drive this on a sustainable basis going forward, I hate to use the tagline coming out of the pandemic of follow the science, because I might get some jaded views if we were in person, but it really is appropriate here, because we've got to continue to evolve with the science and the data in many fronts. And I'll give you a very simple example. It is, just around transportation. So today, the data is very clear that there are larger payload capacity trucks that are available to haul raw ingredients and reduce about a third of the trucks off the road. And all of our surrounding states in California use these 105,000 pound trucks to transport raw ingredients around their state. California does not. We are still on a much smaller capacity, which is increasing our carbon footprint unnecessarily. And again, the data is clear. Those trucks are just as safe, provide no more wear and tear on the highway. But we haven't been able to get that new technology embraced that many states are already utilizing. So simple things like that can have a meaningful impact, both in terms of our sustainability and carbon footprint, as well as getting more efficient and providing more ways to invest back into the business, as we're today spending money unnecessarily because we haven't embraced the real data that's behind that technology.
I couldn't agree more that we have to lean on the science, push the science, and I think that's really one of the themes of this entire conference, is to make sure that we're pushing the science front and center and using that to do the heavy lifting for us. So anyway, great discussion. Kelly and Kimberly, both of your organizations are supporting the National Dairy Industry's Net Zero Initiative, which aims to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, optimize water usage, and improve water quality on farms. Each of you are engaged in on-farm pilot projects that are a significant part of this effort. Please outline these initiatives and explain what your companies hope to achieve through these projects. Kelly?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Net zero has been an important part of our overall strategy around sustainable dairy, mostly because we really believe in the importance of collaborating with the industry on research, on-farm pilots and programs to make the adoption of sustainable practices and technologies more accessible and affordable to farms of all sizes. And this gets a little bit to what Brad was talking about from the economics perspective. Through this partnership, we are investing directly with farmers in our supply chain to test the technologies and regenerative farming practices that will build an environmentally and economically viable path to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. As part of the pilot, a full suite of technologies like evaporative nutrient recovery will be explored with the goal of helping dairies become a source of renewable and organic fertilizer and water reuse while significantly reducing GHG emissions. At Starbucks, we've always believed in using our scale for good and partnering with others who have the same vision for a planet positive future. Net zero is a great example of that. And we're really proud of this work and glad to work with the dairy community, Nestle, and other partners to bring this to life.
Excellent. And Kimberly.
So I think, as you mentioned, John, we are one of the biggest dairy buyers in the world. So for us, the net zero farm is a really important priority within Nestle. And most of our greenhouse gas emissions come from sourcing ingredients, as I mentioned earlier, and most of this is coming from dairy. So being able to tackle this is critical for our overall net zero efforts. So what we're doing globally is actually establishing research farms to test these new solutions. These are not new farms, they're basically everyday farms that we're selecting across the globe to test these kind of climate-friendly and regenerative agricultural farming practices with our academic partners and also with the farming communities. These farms are then being used as a reference for others, so other farmers can come and see these farms to get ideas about what they can use within their own farm. It also helps us to identify where we need more research, also where we need more training, support tools, and also more financing that will be required. So the overall aim is basically to help us reduce the risk and uncertainties and the hurdles, because, you know, a lot of this stuff we haven't tested before. So these net zero farms really provide a really good place for us to test all these new ideas. In the case of the US Dairy Net Zero Initiative, Nestle joined in October 2020. And then with the collaboration of our different industry partners, we followed up in June 21 with the announcement of our first demo farm, which is in California. So Trinkler Dairy in Ceres, California is our first net zero farm in the US. And so basically through this farm, we're sort of demonstrating the different technologies and practices over the next 5 years that can be used for farms of other sizes as well, to show how dairy can basically be a solution for net zero. Because I think this is kind of key. This is one thing that in the dairy industry, we really have to show that dairy will be a solution to net zero. But we're kind of taking the whole farm approach. And so we're looking at lots of different inputs. So I think you showed it very nicely in your chart at the start, where the different emissions are coming from. So the kind of in-field practices on feed management, the nutrient recovery technology, also enteric fermentation, evaluating different feed additives that may help us reach net zero. And then I think lastly, but not least, is that we're also working with farmers to evaluate on-farm fuel and electricity usage. So I think our demo farm in California is a really nice example of these technologies and these different practices, but we also know that every farm is different. And we're not trying to prescribe that what we're doing in this farm in California should be used everywhere, but we are trying to demonstrate what works across the industry. But we don't want to stop there, so we're in the process now of looking for more demo farms across the US and across the globe, so we can sort of prove that this works not only in California, but works in lots of different size and scale farms across the industry. And I will mention we're very excited to talk to farmers about these opportunities as well.
Well, you know, I think when everyone signed on for the Net Zero Initiative, there was a lot of uneasiness about, you know, how are we going to possibly do this? And what you both have just you know, described is you know, real hit the ground running kind of examples of the kind of work we need to do to figure out how to get there, even if we may not know exactly today. So, Brad, I'm going to shift the question around a little bit for you. CEI is a California-owned milk cooperative producing milk in a progressive state with very ambitious climate goals. How is that affecting your operations and your ability to remain competitive in global markets?
Yeah, I think what it's either forced us to do or provided an opportunity for us to be a leader is to look for more technologies, move faster, work with across the industry partners to be on the leading edge. I mean, we farm in a relatively unique way. There's certainly others that do it outside of California, similar to us. But it's when you consider that, I think the average herd size in the U.S. is probably around 300 cows. If you heard on the last panel that I think the world average is more like 3 cows, which is pretty astonishing. And our average herd size is over 1,700 per farm. So it does provide us scale and opportunity to make some investments on things like solar, digesters, and others that can and have allowed us to progress faster. And we're going to continue down that path because we have to, operating in the state of California. Again, we need more collaboration and adoption of technology that's supported, like the example I gave on transportation. And again, that has, I think, dual benefits as it comes back, both in terms of reducing our carbon footprint of moving milk from farm to customer or processing plant, as well as providing some funds to invest back into the business to create some investment in all of these spaces that are going to be required. The other thing I will say that piggybacks a little bit on the conversation that Kimberly just was talking about is, and you touched on it, that, our commitment to net zero by 2050, that was a very honest conversation here in California with our producers as well, because look, I think some were alarmed or concerned that, there's not an exact blueprint on how do we get to net zero across the U.S. dairy. Well, I think it's a little bit of common sense that if we knew that and had that figured out, the goal wouldn't be 2050. It would be something much sooner. So we know we have to let time and technology assist us down this path. And I'll speak just for one, not for the industry, but we certainly, our goal would be to get there much faster than 2050. But again, we have to go as fast as our farm economics will allow, and as fast as technology allows us to take that journey. But there are lots of new technology that we know will be available to us 5 years from now that none of us know anything about today. And we could have said that 5 years ago about the things that we didn't know. Certainly a number of years ago, we probably wouldn't be talking about Bitcoin and driverless cars and all kinds of things that might have seemed like George Jetson type things just not many years ago. So, that will come. We have to be prepared. We have to be aligned, and we have to have a committed supply chain from a resource, capital funding, and structure to be able to take advantage of those as they come up. That's the way we're going to move this agenda together and do it with a sense of urgency.
Bring up resources. What do you see as some of the most urgent resource needs?
Yeah, honestly, a lot of it's capital right now. I think the technology is going to naturally come. A lot of these projects are very capital intense. And again, we are fortunate in California, as I alluded to earlier, that the state has been around digesters. We're going to need more. And that capital is going to have to be a joint commitment across the supply chain for us to be able to make that economically viable for all parties. Together, we can all get it done. Individually, it's going to be very, very difficult. But it shouldn't be lost. And certainly our producers that are on the phone today could give you a lot of hard facts around, what it takes to do a lot of these projects from a capital perspective, on the backs of some really lean margin years on farm. So we've got to make sure we balance all of that as we go forward. And that funding, there's going to be a lot of talk about, how are carbon credits handled? Do they stay within the industry, or, who can count the carbon credits? A lot of that still needs to be worked out. But I still think it comes back to, we have to have a common and joint investment for us to get there and do it with reasonable margins for, again, all three key constituents.
Excellent. Great insight there. Let me go back to Kelly and Kimberly here. Both of your companies also depend on other significant inputs to your final product. Starbucks obviously works with coffee growers and coffee production. Nestle works with chocolate producers and other confectionery suppliers. How do the sustainability efforts of the dairy industry compare to these other sectors? What can we learn from them? Kelly?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I'll tell you, when we started on our early days of dairy sustainability, we sat down with our coffee sustainability team. We still sit down with them, to tell you the truth, nonstop. And part of the reason for that is we understand that our future is intrinsically connected to the future of farmers, whether that's in the coffee sector or in the dairy sector. In coffee, we have a very, very long-term program we call Cafe Practices. And Cafe Practices is a program that we built ourselves, and we work with over 400,000 farmers to really ensure their livelihood, the sustainability of the world. We have our own farm that we learn different agronomy tools with, and really want to continue to build out a sustainable future for coffee and a sustainable future for all of us to drink the coffee. That really sort of fueled us as we started thinking about what does dairy mean and how do we look at dairy similar to how we look at coffee. What is a big difference, of course, is the cow versus a plant producing. And that's, it brings a new nuance. So of course, our programs, we've always wanted them to be around soil, around earth, around farmer, but now we've added in what is the animal impact of this as well. So if we start to think about the impact that we can have in sustainable dairy, we want to make sure that we are really going to the farm, learning from the farm. We're bringing continuous improvement into it. It's been a cornerstone of many programs for us at Starbucks as far as how we've grown and developed to have that continuous improvement element brought in. But more than anything, it's really at the core, and I've said this probably 7 times already, I realize, of how do you partner with that farmer? How do you really understand what their needs are and how you bring forward sustainability initiatives? And since that's been the cornerstone of our Cafe Practices, that'll always be the cornerstone of how we want to do our dairy work as well.
All right, great. Julie?
Yeah, so it's very refreshing to hear Kelly speak, because it's very similar from a Nestle perspective as well. It really goes back to the importance of the farmer and working with the farmer. I think everybody's on this kind of sustainability journey. And I wouldn't say specifically from my perspective that there's any kind of standout industries, but there's definitely some real pockets of great that we can definitely learn from. I think Nestle, very similar to Starbucks, has been working directly with farmers for many years, and through coffee, cocoa, and also dairy with a program that we call Farmer Connect. And this kind of close connection has really helped us to initiate lots of different programs around sort of protecting the ecosystem, and also trialing a number of our sort of regenerative agricultural practices as well. I think Nestle, from a fundamental approach to doing business, is about creating shared value. And so this is shared value both for the shareholders, but all the way through to the farmers as well. And I think this is about the sort of long-term focus that Nestle's had, being around for 150 years. We want to be around for another 150 years. And we know that we can't do this without change. And it really comes back to the farmers.
10 minutes left, 10 minutes.
Excellent. But in a little different vein, CBI is committed to supporting dairy industry-wide sustainability efforts at both the national and state level. What value do you see, and what have you learned in partnering with other dairy cooperatives and processors in these efforts?
Look, it's a very important piece. If you think about this on three different dimensions, we know that we operate in a global marketplace. We've got, some of the largest multinationals on the panel with us today. So U.S. dairy, if you start at that level, is competing with all other dairy globally. And we used to talk about that mostly in the dimension of price. And what you're hearing today is there's a lot more dimensions to it beyond price. The next dimension is within the state of California, where we participate in Dairy Cares, and again was one of the founding members of that organization. That's really at the center of working on a pre-competitive basis. How do we all work together to raise the water level and allow all boats to rise? Because as we all do, that will be good for all of the producers. And so, I'm fortunate enough to sit on a lot of boards, particularly on a national level, to work against these key initiatives, again, on a pre-competitive basis, to work towards, again, how do we share best practices? And a lot of the focus really is on a common platform in terms of how we measure things, how we communicate things, and how we aggregate data, because that's really important. One of the areas where this starts to get very complicated is when it's very decentralized. And if we've got Nestle asking for one set of data measured one way on one form, Starbucks asking for something separate, and then name your favorite multinational 2, 3, 4, 5, then it becomes very difficult to both communicate a real story that's quantified in a like way, and administratively it's almost impossible. So these are the types of workspaces that are important for these organizations to help solve those. That's why we have Farm ES. That's why we have a lot of these platforms that have been able to help us and will continue to do so as we go forward. So, every company at the end of the day, including California Dairies, will figure out what is our space to create the most value for our member owners. That doesn't have to be in conflict with how do we work together as an industry to be more effective and be able to communicate, again, because we are operating in a global marketplace, and that's really who we're competing with.
Excellent. So Kelly, not to put you on the spot here, but Starbucks has made a lot of news over the last few years about plant-based menu items. What does that mean for dairy? How does that all fit together?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I actually probably would have been surprised if you hadn't asked it. And I'll tell you a half-second story of last time I was on a dairy farm. The farmer said to me, "Mrs. Bankston, you can't milk an almond. Do you understand that?" Which was a very impactful moment for me, and probably for all of our dairy farmers that are watching. So the reality is we are a retailer that really wants to service and support the customization and the variety of diets of our customers. So that means there's a home for dairy as well as plant-based alternatives within our store. You see it in the pastry case in a breakfast sandwich. You see it in some of the variety of milk offerings. But as I stated earlier, 60% of our beverages still have dairy in them, and that is still our intent. With that also being said, though, what's exciting for us about conversations like this is we do need to make dairy more sustainable, and we need to bring those things together. But there is very much a home for dairy at Starbucks, and we will continue to push, innovate, partner, and invest in this important part of our business.
Very good. Very good. Kimberly, any thoughts from your end on that one?
Yeah, so Nestle is also heavily investing in expanding our plant-based range, and it's basically to meet consumers' demand. And but in the end, it's about choice. And We continue to invest in dairy at the same time as we continue to invest in our plant-based range, because this is what consumers are expecting. But in the end, we will need dairy, and we need dairy for many of our key brands globally. So a number of our billion-dollar brands, dairy is essential. I mean, it's a few really good examples. Obviously, you know DiGiorno very well. I mean, what's DiGiorno without cheese? And then we've got some really nice examples globally. We've got Milo, which is basically a huge cocoa malted dairy beverage, which is sold across Asia, Oceania, and Africa. And then the other piece, which is critically important, is the infant formula business. We absolutely need dairy to find solutions from a net zero perspective to be able to meet all of these sort of key brands.
So Brad, does all that work for you?
Yeah, actually it does. We believe in consumer choice. There's a lot of dairy companies out there that are also in the plant-based business. So I think we have to be honest about what's in the marketplace. I think our job as dairy, both producers and processors, is to make it the most sustainably produced. It's already the world's best, most nutritious product that nature makes, but do it in a more sustainable way. And at the end of the day, consumers will make their choice. I think the one area that I have to put a plug in is we are strongly opposed to plant-based calling themselves milk, because that's not what it is. But to the extent there is plant-based consumption, that's a consumer choice, and we need to spend less time worrying about that and more time making milk more sustainable and more attractive for people that are have that in their value system. That's our best energy spent. So I'm not in conflict with any of that.
To overseas, Brad, particularly, maybe you can start, Kimberly. 30% of California's milk goes into export products. How would you compare the concerns of buyers and consumers in some of these international markets?
Well, look, it's been said many times already in the setup and in this call, whether it's table stakes or it's a requirement. All those things are true. 10 years ago when I was having discussions, this was either not a topic, or if there was a discussion, it was, someone had to check the box at the end of the conversation that they asked the question about, do you care about sustainability? And when you said yes, they said, okay, great. I'll talk to you next month. Today those conversations are about, give me the details on your sustainability efforts. What were your baseline numbers last year? What are they next year numerically, not, qualitatively? And so it's, when we first started having conversations internally about signing on to the net zero, the best way I could describe it to our membership that they fully embraced was, this is a journey that the consumers require. And if we want to sell milk to the best customers in the world, we have to go down this journey, and we have to go down it eagerly, not reluctantly. And so it's bigger now than it was yesterday, and it'll be bigger tomorrow than it is today. And our job as leaders in the industry is to lead, not follow or not be pulled, kind of kicking and screaming. How do we do it proactively in a way, again, that's economically viable for all parties? And I'm super encouraged, for our farmers that are on the phone. You heard directly out of Kimberly's mouth, we want to work with farms. This is not about telling our farmers how to farm. This is about how do we get more sustainable regardless of the way you farm, because your solution may be different than your neighbor's solution. But working with farms is at the core of how we move this agenda forward, not telling them, here's how it has to be done. And I think that's been a real important partnership that both of our panelists have outlined, and I greatly appreciate today.
Well, thank you, Brad, and Kimberly, and And Kelly, we're almost out of time. We got about 30 seconds. Any final thoughts from either of you?
I can go ahead and jump in. Only thought I would say is just thank you. Thank you for your willingness to partner with us. Thank you for your willingness to change the game and really bring sustainable dairy to the forefront.
Excellent. Well, thank you all.
Yeah, sorry, John, very quickly from my side as well. Yeah, thanks a lot. We're very excited in this journey that we're all on together, and thanks a lot for the California dairy industry for inviting us to talk about this today. And hopefully we'll get to see each other in person soon.
Okay, well, again, thank you all very much for participating, and we're moving on. Thanks again.